I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited about teaching this class. My name is Duncan. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. Have been in private practice for longer than some of you are old, probably. I have been in practice for about 35 years in North Dallas. And for the last several years, I've taught classes at SMU on an adjunct basis. SMU has a master's in counseling program here in their Plano campus, and so I've really enjoyed teaching at that level for these master's level students. I really appreciate the invitation to be here with you tonight and for this series. And appreciate your being here. And I hope that you can get something each week that is going to not only be informative, but also very practical, something that you can take away from here with you, put it into practice, add add something to your marriage or other relationships. So anyway, I'll go more into that as we move along. I want you to also feel free as I move on to raise your hand, to ask questions, to interrupt me if necessary, because I can launch into lecture mode real easily, and I kind of get enamored with the sound of my own voice. But I'm really happy to entertain questions and comments and observations, because this is not an exhaustive study at all. However, what you want to know is that a lot of the material I'm going to be presenting tonight and throughout the next 6 weeks is also material that I teach in my SMU course on marriage and family therapy. And so I think it's very practical for budding therapists, but there are wide applications. There are spiritual applications. That's going to be one of the emphases of this series as well. So what I want to give you is briefly kind of a preview of coming attractions, so that you know what you're getting into before you get here. Tonight we're going to be talking about the human brain and how that impacts our relationships, how that can be our own best friend or our own worst enemy. And so I'll make some very practical applications before we finish tonight. Next week, the art of understanding ourselves. That's kind of small print, isn't it? The people with good eyes can see it, but I'll make a note of that and try to enlarge it a little bit for next week. Self-understanding is one of the most important concepts in having a good, solid, viable relationship, a viable marriage. The better we understand ourselves, the better we are going to be able to understand each other. And so we're going to talk mostly next week about what that means. What is it about myself that I need to understand? And what is it that we each bring into our marriages with us? We never come into our marriages by ourselves. We are bringing other ideas, we're bringing other people, we're bringing influences that we grew up with, positive and negative, and the more aware of that we are, the better we are. The following week, God's plan for marriage, and how we mess it up. I think probably most people here have a good understanding of how God wants our marriages to operate, and how that He is the author of this marital system that most of us are living in. But we're going to focus on what we do most of the time unintentionally to mess it up. Most people don't try to hurt each other, but we do it. And we do it sometimes without even knowing it. In fact, there is no such thing as a painless relationship. The closer we get, the more we rub up against each other physically and figuratively, and the more sparks will fly from that. And so we want to spend some time talking about how we mess up God's plan. September 21st, the chemistry of love. See, some of you are trained in this field, I would imagine, but there are so many chemical reactions that are taking place when we first meet somebody. We are first drawn to somebody. We are first connected to somebody. We're literally high on drugs, not the illegal drugs, but it's important to understand that, because when you're high on drugs, sometimes the decisions you make, at least this is what I hear, sometimes the decisions you make are not the best decisions in the world. And there's one particular chemical we're going to be talking about. It's oxytocin. Oxytocin is the drug that's released into our systems when we're infatuated. And that drug gives us the sense that everything's going to be okay, whether it is or not. And so, so the girl, the 18-year-old girl tries to explain to her dad that, I know he's 28. Yeah, I know he doesn't have a job. Yeah, I know that he's hanging out with shady characters. Yes, I know that he has a record, an arrest record. But Dad, you don't understand. I love him. And everything's going to be okay. At that moment, she truly, honestly, sincerely believes that. And she's the only one, really, that believes that, because everybody else pretty much knows better. And nobody else is in love with this guy, with good reason, probably. Anyway, the chemistry of love. We're going to talk about attraction on the next week, the science of attraction. What is it that brings us together? And what we're going to learn is the factors that bring us together are very different from the factors that keep us together. Very different, almost night and day difference. That doesn't mean that the factors that bring us together are not important. They're vitally important. So what am I bringing to the relationship, but what am I attracted to in that other person? Facial expressions, body shape, sense of humor. Anyway, save that for later. We're going to talk next about disconnection and safety. And I will tell you that as a marriage counselor, what research has shown us over the years is that two factors that most couples who come for couples counseling bring with them into our offices are, number one, disconnection. Probably they wouldn't be there if they weren't disconnected, sometimes in some very serious ways. So they bring disconnection with them, but they also bring a lack of safety. Sometimes that's physical, and most of the time it's emotional. And so I talked with a lady today, and she and her husband have been married several years. They have some disconnection, and so she was telling me about last week she had a panic attack. Wow. And she described it, and I asked her to tell me, what triggered it, what could she figure out about it. She told me all that. And then I said, what did your husband say when you shared this with him? I didn't share this with him. Really? This was a big event last week in her life. And so let's talk about why you didn't feel safe. And that's what I mean by safety, disconnection and a lack of safety. Well, she didn't feel safe sharing something that was a big deal for her with him. And then the last session, we're going to talk about safe conversations. And that just simply means healing and reconnecting. Once we are disconnected, how do we reconnect? How do we build the safety atmosphere, the atmosphere of safety that enables us to reconnect? So we're going to move on. There's some of this I'm going to go kind of quickly through. My understanding is that I think they told me that I could stay here until like 9 o'clock or something like that, but I would probably be here by myself if I stayed here that long. My goal is for us to begin as closely at 6:45 as we can, and to end as closely at 7:45 as we can. So if you need to leave, then please feel free to do that. Not going to be a problem. What I want to start with tonight, and it may be a little bit repetitive. Some of you may have been in the class that I taught here back in January on, what was that on? Transformed thinking. And it was, and so some of this may be repetitive if you were here. Let's start tonight by looking at Matthew 4, 1 through 11. We're going to read that together and then going to put it aside and come back to it before our class is finished tonight. So you're familiar with this event. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, let these stones become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written," so the devil quotes Scripture, "it is written, he will command his angels concerning you that they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him and angels came and attended to him. So we're going to go from Matthew 4 to Psalm 139, another verse that many, if not most of you, are already familiar with. When David wrote, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." My question is, how much do you think David knew about anatomy and physiology? I'm guessing not very much. I know enough to be dangerous. But again, some of you are probably trained in this field and may know a lot more than anybody else in the room. My point being that over the years, over the centuries, we have learned a lot about anatomy and physiology. We've learned more and more and are learning more and more every day. So I think it isn't a stretch to say that the human being is the masterpiece of God's creation. Now, I've always had pets most of my life, and I like pets, and I know you like your pets, but I have to tell you that your pets are not human. And you're saying, "Well, you don't know my cat or my dog." And I love them, and I'm not being derogatory about it. We are created above the rest of God's creation, all of the rest of God's creation. We humans were given dominion over the rest of God's creation. So it's not a stretch to say the human being is the masterpiece of God's creation. I'm going to take it one step further and let you know that the human brain is the masterpiece of the masterpiece. The human brain there's just nothing like it. There never has been, and there never will be anything to match the wonder and the awe and the complexity and the power of the human brain. So even though with research today we know more than we ever have, but until recently, scientists and medical doctors have not been able to even examine the human brain until after the person has died. And they perform an autopsy and they can learn a lot about the human brain. But while a person is still alive, that has not been even possible, that kind of examination, until the last 20 to 25 years. That's just like day before yesterday. Over the past 20 to 25 years, new scanning and computing technologies have enabled scientists to see the activity of the brain while we are living. And so we recognize, we've learned more in the last 10 years about the brain than was learned in the previous 10,000 years or more. And I just want you to understand how huge that is. It's huge for every field of endeavor, but it's really huge for the work that I do and what psychiatrists do and other therapists. We've identified, I say we, they have identified certain regions of the brain and what those regions are responsible for. Certain regions of the brain that are responsible for speech, others responsible for hearing, other abilities, athletic skills and coordination and things like that are all controlled by certain specific regions of the brain. Emotions are controlled by certain regions of the brain. I saw a video just a few years ago, and you may have seen videos like this where the patient is in surgery. He is having brain surgery. There is a part of his skull that is removed. His brain is exposed and he is awake. Don't ask me how. The doctor was asking him about his emotions, and the doctor had a probe, and he probed one or stimulated one area of the brain and asked the patient, "What do you feel?" And he said, "I feel happy." To another region of the brain, "How do you feel?" "I feel sad. I feel afraid. I feel anxious." And so somebody who knows what they're doing understands that different regions of the brain can control a lot of different things. We also know about genetic predispositions, that there are some people who are predisposed to addictions, for example. If my father was an alcoholic, if my grandfather was an alcoholic, if all my uncles were alcoholics, I better pay real close attention to that, because I may have a predisposition to alcoholism. Now, I'm not going to become an alcoholic if I don't drink, of course, but we need to, the better we understand those things. People are certainly predisposed to anxiety, to depression, to other mental and emotional things. So today we know more than we ever have known about the human brain, but literally we still don't know how much we don't know. This is pre-kindergarten as far as the brain is concerned. It's one of the most exciting things in my field that's happened in my lifetime, because we don't know how much we don't know. But the curve is steep, and people are working on these things around the world. I'm going to pause here for just a minute, and I may not have said anything yet worth commenting on, but any observations or thoughts or questions that you might have. Thanks for that. And you've triggered me. I got an email just this morning. If you want to write down this website, it is all about neurology and therapy. The website is called neuropsychotherapist.com. I got an email from them this morning that had 3 little 1-minute videos about the brain, how the brain operates. And I didn't have time, really didn't have time, because I was seeing people today, to put any of those into my presentation. But it will go; those videos will go in future presentations. It's just, and there are the organizations like that are just working around the clock, and they're coming up with stuff every day, just like what you mentioned. Anything else? Any other thoughts? It's just, I won't say fascinating again, but I just did. So the human brain, 3 things very briefly that we formerly believed. I'll try to make this brief. Formerly believed that our brains had finished their development very early in life, maybe by the time we're 16, 18, 21, or early adulthood, that the brain had stopped its development, that it wasn't going, it were pretty well locked in, and there was little hope of changing the way we think or the way we feel or the way that we behave. That was not too long ago. There's only one problem with that. It's not true. Additionally, not too long ago, we believed that we were born with a finite number of brain cells. And if you do I remember this in high school, you may remember the alcohol talk. Okay, so if you drink excessively, you overdrink, you drink persistently, you're killing off millions of brain cells, and buddy, that's it for you. That's all you get. You don't get any more. And I mean, that really resonated with me. I don't want to lose these brain cells. They're a little bit too precious. Okay, so the only problem with that is it's not true either. The brain reproduces or regenerates new cells until we take our dying breath, in fact.
Doctor,
yes?
With all that being said, some things like alcohol and drugs still can damage the brain.
Oh, absolutely.
But is it a different section of the brain?
Well, this really goes to point number 3 here. And so, formerly believed that the brain was unalterable. Once it was damaged, either by abuse or by trauma, by accidents or whatever, then that was it. You're pretty well not going to get anything that's going to be fixed. And so, when you talk about alcohol, you talk about drugs. In fact, there's no extra charge. I'm going to slide something in here extra, but it's about marijuana. And there have been some studies done recently. I'm going to say recently, within the last 2 or 3 years, that just have really, really gotten my attention. I don't counsel a lot with adolescents, but I'm in that office with people who do. And the research shows that the earlier a child or a teenager begins using marijuana, the greater likelihood there is for brain damage, and brain damage of a nature that is really not going to be alterable. They say that the marijuana that kids do today or adults do today is not your daddy's marijuana. Well, my daddy didn't have any marijuana, but you get the point. A generation ago is a really different a different set of circumstances. So, it needs to be understood and emphasized that we can damage the masterpiece of the masterpiece. It is well within our ability to do that. But with trauma especially, there is a lot that is being learned how that neural pathways, we'll get to that in just a minute, can be rewired. And I'm going to show you a really interesting video in just a minute that will demonstrate that. So we talk about brain plasticity. Brain plasticity is the belief now, the understanding that our brain is not rigid, it is not unalterable, but in fact it is plastic. And under certain conditions, certain areas of the brain can be rewired. So very, very briefly, a few years ago we believed that the brain it had to do all with electrical impulses. That's not incorrect, but it's incomplete. Yeah, there are electrical impulses that go through our brain millions of times in a second. Now we also know of the chemical process of brain chemistry and how that, especially in some emotional challenges, anxiety and depression. Okay, I'm going to say this again. There's no extra charge for this, but one of the things I truly believe, and have come to this belief in just the last few hours. I saw Donnie looking at his watch, and I thought, okay, Donnie, why are you looking at your watch? And it got me completely off track. The last few years is that I don't use the term mental illness anymore, because I believe that what we used to call mental illness is medical illness. I believe that mental illness, and it doesn't need to have the stigma, still has the stigma, of course, but I take anti-inflammatories because I have arthritis in my knees. I feel better when I take my medicine, I feel worse when I don't. And so that same principle, whether we're talking about diabetes, or we're talking about anxiety or depression, is a very, very, very strong chemical component, not mental illness. And then what we now know is that the brain is comprised of just millions and millions of neural pathways. And so the combination of electrical and chemical and neural pathways leads us to kind of where we are now in our understanding of the brain. And this is what is the good news. The good news is when the network changes, everything changes. When the neural pathways change, and they can, everything changes. You probably have done things like this without even realizing what you've done. My right hand is my dominant hand. About 4 months ago, I fell. My wife pushed me down. By the way, I didn't introduce to you my lovely and talented wife, Joy, and thank you for being here. And you are welcome to meet her, but you're forbidden from asking her any questions about our marriage. All right, that's completely and totally off limits. We were doing a little simple home chore. I stepped off the ladder. I didn't fall off the ladder, as she likes to say, but I stepped off the ladder, lost my balance, fell back into our really, really pretty rock garden. Shattered my right elbow, okay? And so my dominant hand, right elbow, and you've done this. If you lose temporarily lose a particular skill or an ability to do something, you adapt, you adjust. So I learned to do a lot of stuff with my left hand, and shaving was one of the most challenging. I cut myself a little bit. But once that new neural pathway is formed, it's pretty simple. You can even write your signature with your non-dominant hand if you have to. Now, most of us don't have to do that, so we prefer to do it the way it's more comfortable. But that's just a simple little example of changing, rewiring neural pathways. So what does this mean for us? Well, one thing it means is transformed thinking. And so when we look at Romans 12, 1 and 2, we see that Paul writes, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Now verse 2 is what it's all about here in terms of, in the context of our lesson. And do not be conformed to this world. Don't let the world determine your shape. Don't fit the mold of the world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The YouVersion reads, don't become like the people of this world. Instead, change the way you think. Do you think the Maker understands the process? Do you think He understands what we can do? Then you will always be able to determine what God really wants, what is good, pleasing, and perfect. So let's segue then to the Sermon on the Mount, one of the best series of examples of transformed thinking, of establishing new neural pathways. Is Jesus' teaching. It was said to you before, don't kill. I say to you, don't be angry. Why? Why?
Emotional.
Yeah. And what happens when we allow anger? I want you to think about the word dwell. When we dwell on, when we allow anger to dwell, what are some of the possible outcomes of that? It does. It is a self-perpetuating kind of process. And if you get angry enough for long enough, you're liable to do some damage to somebody. You may not kill anybody, but you may do emotional damage. You may, in fact, do physical damage to somebody else. So it's a matter of what do we allow ourselves to dwell on, or upon what do we allow ourselves to dwell? It was said before, don't kill. I say don't dwell on anger. Don't let yourself do that. So Jesus knew you got the power to change the way you think. Don't do that. It was said before, don't commit adultery. But I say to you, don't lust. Same principle. If I allow myself to dwell on images, lustful, pornographic images, if I allow myself to watch somebody, a female, and just dwell on that, then the neural pathways that I dwell on are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. They're going to last longer. And the possibility increases that I'm going to do something that is really, really harmful. It's harmful to her, harmful to me, harmful to any relationship I may be in. So don't even allow yourself to dwell on that. What's the natural response when somebody strikes you? Yeah, strike them back. But I say to you, turn the other cheek. Wow. Go the second mile. When somebody compels you to give you your coat, give them, or get your cloak, give your coat as well. Go farther than it's expected of you. What about this one? Love your enemies? I don't know that that's ever been commanded anywhere in history or in Scripture until Jesus said that. Now, I may be wrong about that. I haven't really given that a lot of research. But love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Don't worry. What? But Jesus, you don't know how much there is to worry about. You know what? He does. He knows. But I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know what I'm going to wear. I don't know what I'm going to eat. Okay, the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, are you not more important than them? Don't worry. So what should you do? Seek first. He tells us what to dwell on. He tells us what not to dwell on. Retaliation and lust and anger and retribution. But he also tells us what to dwell on. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and you don't have anything to worry about. These other things are going to be added to you. Here's what you need to dwell on. Here's where your brain needs to be centered. You talk about revolutionary teaching. This was revolutionary teaching. Then and now. So what Jesus basically is saying, if you're going to be my disciple, you cannot be like everybody else. You can't act like everybody else, but you can't even think like everybody else. If you're going to be my disciple, more is expected of you. You must think differently. You must change the way that you think. And so the reality is we can modify our neural networks. Much of this is within our power to control. The brain has the ability to change at any age. Changes in the physical brain then also are manifest in changes in our abilities. It's possible to reinvigorate certain aspects of our brains at any age. How many of you do brain exercises, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, and memory exercises like that? Somebody please raise your hand. If you're not doing it, you need to do it, because years ago, 50 years ago, we didn't know how good physical exercise was, how remarkable it was for us in our health and our longevity. But people like Dr. Kenneth Cooper have preached that sermon forever, and now pretty much everybody knows how helpful. It doesn't mean we do it, but we know how helpful it is. The same thing is true for brain exercises. The more we exercise our brains, then the better our brains are going to be. There are stories like that are all over the place, and more every day. So just a few more applications here. What else does this mean for us? I want you to remember this phrase, because I believe it's a primary truth about the brain and about brain plasticity, and I think it has many direct implications on our relationships. So I'm getting to that point. The primary truth is we cannot control the thoughts that come into our minds, but we can control the thoughts that stay on our minds. And so you're driving your car and you're coming home from work, you're going to work, you're running errands or whatever, and something comes on the radio, or you see a billboard, and some negative thought is interjected into your mind. And you really can't control that, but you control what you do with it once that thought is there. And so what we're talking about now is when we find ourselves dwelling on something self-defeating, and very, very common things like that are, I'm no good, I'm not worthwhile, if I'm a fraud, I'm an imposter. If people really knew the kind of person I am, then nobody would like me. In fact, nobody likes me anyway. And we dwell, those are very self-perpetuating and self-defeating thoughts. The question is, what do we do when we find ourselves dwelling on these kinds of thoughts? Well, there are two answers to that. Number one is we have to recognize the thoughts for what they are. And number two is we need to replace them with healthy thoughts. So here's the principle. What are some things as a marriage and family therapist that I hear with some regularity when people, either as a couple or individuals who are married and unhappily married, when they come into my office? One of the things we hear is, I'm not happy. And as long as the implication is, as long as I'm in this relationship, I never will be happy. So can you imagine dwelling on that hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and we truly convince ourselves that not only am I unhappy in this marriage, there's no chance at all that I'm ever going to be happy in this marriage. Another thing that we hear is that he will never change, she will never change. And so we're talking about resignation, and people will say, it's just not fair. And so if you're dwelling on how unfairly you have been treated, whether in your marriage or in any other area of your life, that's going to consume your thought, and those neural pathways are going to become stronger and stronger and stronger as you go on. People will come in and hold up their hand like this and just say, we are so different. As if to say, there is no way possible that we could stay married and ever have a satisfying, viable marriage. We are so different. Research has shown over and over and over again that the differences are not the problem. Differences in a marriage are not the problem. But if we dwell on that, there's a sense of powerlessness that goes along with it. And then people will say, well, we need more money, we need a bigger house, we need another child. We need another child, right? And then people will dwell on, if only I hadn't married so-and-so, if only I had married so-and-so, then my life would be so different and, by implication, so much better. Counseled with a lady several years ago, and she was unhappy with her husband. Now, I'd met her husband. We'd had some joint sessions. But she was doing this. She was dwelling on, she started dwelling on the next door neighbor. And so she finally said in one of our sessions, her husband was not there, but she just said, Dr. Duncan, if I were married to the next door neighbor, I would be awesome. So thankfully I had the presence of mind to say, respectfully disagree. If you're not awesome right now in the marriage that you're in, you will not be awesome in another marriage. Your job is to be awesome right now. I don't know what that impact that's going to have on your current marriage, but she was doing that to herself. She was fantasizing like a teenager, living in a happily ever after kind of mentality. So what happens when we dwell on any of those neural pathways get stronger and deeper and more difficult to change. So how do we replace those? Well, okay, I'll give you an example, and this is an example I used the last time I taught here. I'd like for everybody here right now to visualize, get in your mind, a picture of a pink elephant. Got it? I mean, it may be a real elephant that's painted pink. It may be a cartoon pink elephant. But I want you to dwell on that pink elephant just for a few more seconds. And now, I want you to forget it. Have you forgotten it? Now, with my mind, I probably could forget it because I've known it, but you don't forget something just by telling yourself to forget it. What you have to do is replace that image with something else. So, if the fire alarm went off right here, right now, and we were all told to get out of the building, there's some dangerous situation that has arisen, we're getting out of the building. I'm getting out of the building. You are too. And guess what? You're not thinking about that pink elephant anymore because something more immediate has replaced that thought. Now, when you go to bed tonight, you may think again about the pink elephant, and you may send me a text and say, I wish you hadn't said that. But that's the principle. How do we change our neural pathways? We replace self-defeating thoughts with healthy thoughts. So, okay, skip through a couple of things here. Let's go back to Matthew 4. And think about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. So I read an article this week by Max Lucado, and he talks about the temptation, but he also goes to Luke's version of that in Luke 4. And Luke's version says the Spirit led Jesus into the desert where the devil tempted Jesus for 40 days. That's a little bit of a different slant. Because I always thought Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the devil came with him with only these 3 temptations. And what Lucado is saying is, no, that's not correct. Satan got, here's a quote from him, Satan got on Jesus like a shirt and refused to leave. That he was tempted the entire time that he was praying and fasting. And so I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. So Jesus could not avoid temptation. He was fully human. But what I want you to do is to consider what Jesus did not say to his tempter. When he was tempted, what Jesus did say, it is written. And what we want to acknowledge is that Satan is a pro. You know it and I know it. He is the best at doing what he's doing that there has ever been or ever will be. Satan is a pro, and he knows us very, very well. He knows our strengths, he knows our weaknesses, he knows our vulnerabilities. And so, think about what Jesus did not say in response to the temptation. He did not say, you know, you're right, Satan, I am famished. I haven't had anything to eat in 6 weeks. And, you know, I am human, and so I'm starving to death. Food is all I've been able to think about. I've been dwelling on, especially bread. I can't get it off my mind. I need something to eat. I deserve something to eat. You can't imagine Jesus saying that, right? Ludicrous. But there's a reason Jesus didn't answer that way, is because that's not what he had been dwelling on, right? Jesus did not say to Satan, you're right, I left the glory and the grandeur of heaven for this. It would really be nice if somebody would just give me a little bit of recognition. Nobody knows who I am. And Jesus did not say, you make a good point, Satan. Instead of being tortured, crucified, despised, and rejected, I want to be adored, honored, and praised. That's all I've been able to think about these 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. No. And the reason, of course, that Jesus did not answer in any of these ways is that, well, I'll throw one thing at you first that we're going to come back to next week. And it's the self-understanding. John 13 talks about how Jesus knew who he was. He knew where he'd come from. He knew what his purpose was. He knew where he was going. So that self-understanding enabled Jesus to stay on task, to stay focused, and to dwell on the things that he needed to dwell on. So remember John 13, we'll come back to that next week. So we also know what had Jesus been doing the previous 6 weeks, upon what had he been dwelling, not how hungry or how lonely or how miserable he was, how unfairly he had been treated. So how did Jesus respond? He responded, it is written. And why did he respond that way? That's what he was dwelling on. The entirety of his time in the wilderness, he was dwelling on the Word of God. And so it was so natural and simple that those those words from Scripture came to his lips when he was tempted. He had his neural pathways were well built and well maintained, but not just when he started his public ministry. All of his life, Jesus had been working on his neural pathways, and this is how they served him well in this temptation situation. Okay, what I want you to leave here with today, and I'll still offer you a little bit of an opportunity to make comments or ask questions before we dismiss, is that humans have a unique capacity for relationships, more than any other creature that God has ever made. And we love our animals, and our animals love us. And I love the little book that was written several years ago that said, I wish you loved me like my dog. And you know, there's a lot of truth to that. But we are unique. We have capacities that none of God's other creations have. We have the capacity to connect on an emotional level, to give and to receive love, to hear and understand and empathize, to forgive and to receive forgiveness, to control our emotions, to treat each other with trust and respect, and to communicate on levels that are unknown to God's other creatures. We have these capacities because we're the masterpiece of God's creation. Our brain is the masterpiece of the masterpiece. And so what we're going to be doing for the rest of this series is talking about practical ways that we can utilize our brains to the fullest extent to maximize our relationships and to enjoy the kind of relationship that maybe we haven't ever had or maybe haven't had in a long time. So let me pause one more time and see if you have any. I've got one more little thing I want to show you that you can write down. It's a TED Talk that you may appreciate. But any other thoughts, questions, or observations? Or again, I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you for your thoughts and for your comments. I'd like for us to close with a brief prayer, please. Father in heaven, thank you so very much for this occasion, for the opportunity to be here and to study your Word and to study the overlap between your Word and medical science and healthy living. Help us to understand as much as we can so that we can not just modify our thinking, change the way we think, but continue to dwell on those things that are pure and helpful and honorable, and that we can modify our neural pathways to focus and to stay focused and to seek first your kingdom and your righteousness. Thank you for every blessing you give us in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you again. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. One more slide. I don't know if you've ever seen this or not. This is a TED Talk, and all you have to do is go to TED.com, plug in Conception to Birth. This is one of the most amazing videos I've ever seen in my life. It is an animation of what takes place inside a human body, inside the female body, when the sperm and the egg come together and conceive a life, and how that child develops throughout the months of gestation. It is not presented, narrated by a theologian, but by a mathematician. And one of the points he makes in this talk is that in terms of this kind of thing happening by chance, the odds are astronomically opposed to that. There is just no way, without an intelligent designer, that this kind of process can take place. So if you haven't seen this, I think it will be very, very interesting and intriguing to you. Thanks again. Hope to see you next week.